What's up, you beautiful chuds, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror channel. Last night, I got the opportunity to go to foggy old London town, to Leicester Square, for the press screening for one of the year's most hotly anticipated horror movies, Shelby Oaks. I travelled through my awful travel anxiety and went through a few panic attacks on the way to go and see this movie. And was it worth it? Well, we're going to get into all of that. I know I don't put out as many reviews as I should or actually want to. I'd love to put out more reviews, but they take a little bit of time. So if you are somebody that likes reviews where it's very much a quick, simple, yeah, the movie's brilliant, or no, it's a load of shit, then you might want to go and find a different review for Shelby Oaks, because what I like to do is really try and go in detail, really talk about how I feel about the movie itself, and I'll go into how and why and so on as well. So this movie is a really interesting one, and that's why this review is going to be a little bit longer than, as I said, there are a lot of other reviews that you might see out there on YouTube. It's not going to be as straightforward as what you think, because there's a lot to this movie and there's a lot to try and talk about. As usual, for me to do that, there are going to be spoilers. Now, I'm going to try and not ruin the movie for everyone, but do be aware that I will be talking about some of the events of, you know, what happens in the movie, or some things that happen, or what the movie may be about and what it may all mean. I might spoil that for you. So if you do want to see this movie and you don't want spoilers, then once again, don't watch this review. But I want to try and be as honest as I possibly can. And to be honest with you, I think I'm in a pretty good place to be able to do that for you, because a lot of people will know what Shelby Oaks is. So Shelby Oaks is a movie. It's directed, and first time directed, by Chris Stuckmanns. Now, and the reason as to why I am probably a really good person to review this is because, me being the old man that I am, I don't really know a lot about YouTube or the YouTube personalities and so on. The only reason I really know about Chris Stuckmanns, if that's even how you say his name, so I apologise if it's not, but the only reason that I do know of him is purely because of this movie, and looking into this movie, because the more I learned about this movie, the more that it's made me wanted to go to London to watch it, that I got the opportunity to. And even if I didn't, I would still want to watch it, because this movie is an independent movie that we get to see on the big screen. As far as I'm aware, that this movie is getting a nationwide release in the UK, and of course also as well in the US as well. So it's a big deal that we've once again got an independent horror that they're putting on the big screen for us to go and watch, and also once again to support independent horror. That is why I wanted to see this movie, because outside of Let's Talk Horror, anybody that knows what Let's Talk Horror is knows that outside of it, acting and filmmaking is what I've always wanted to do with my life ever since I was a kid. So independent horror is something that's very, very important to me personally, because I feel that that is where I am. That is where I belong. That's sort of like what I'm part of. If I was to start once again trying to create something to put out there for people, whatever I create is going to be a no budget entry into horror, whatever that may be. So I get so inspired by people that make movies with not a lot. And that is how I came across Shelby Oaks. I don't really know who Chris Stuckmanns is. I just know that he made this movie, and I know that he's built up an incredible fan base, that essentially his fan base paid for the movie. Now, obviously, from what I understand, reading a little bit more, that this movie, he ran out of money trying to make, and then that's when Mike Flanagan man came on, who I can never pronounce his name properly, so that's how he is. But also, I think Neon came on board, gave him a little bit of money for maybe some reshoots, maybe some extra things and so on. But he's very intriguing, you know, like when you hear things about this sort of stuff, you get very like interested in it, a bit inspired by it. And that's what I want when I watch a movie. I want to be inspired by it, but you never really know how they're actually going to work out until it happens. So when it does happen, I get really intrigued. I get really excited about the prospect of seeing a movie that is done on a small budget rather than the big budget movies that we seem to see from obviously the studios, which unfortunately don't end up necessarily always being the spectacle or the type of movie that we really want. So I was really interested, and that's why I took myself all the way over to London to go and watch it. Now, when I do reviews, one thing that I always want to try and do is really get into it, like I said. So I'm going to give you some pros, then I'm going to give you some cons, what I don't like about the movie, and then I'm going to give you a bit of an overall sort of thought at the end of it. Irrelevant of what I say, always go and see the movie at the cinema and support independent horror. But also when it goes on streaming, if it gets a physical release, just keep supporting it. Whatever I say doesn't actually mean anything. I just like to put out there what I think about it, what I like about it, what I don't like about it. I just like to be honest and talk about horror. And that's why I'm doing this review. And I probably should be doing more of them, unless people think I'm just talking absolute shit and they don't need to. But I don't care. That's what I'm here for. So we're going to get right into the pros. So the first pro that I'm going to talk about really sort of puts it all together in a way. It's a very important part of what I think about the movie and about Chris Stuckmann as a director, because once again, as I said, this is his first feature film that he's making. So is it already like a home run? Is he like already got straight off the bat, essentially like the Philippou brothers, where they directed Talk to Me, and that's their first feature film, and it's absolutely fucking amazing. And then they follow it up with another one that I'm still yet to see, but I hear amazing things about. Has he just hit home run straight away? Well, that's what I'm going to get into. But one of the biggest aspects of this movie is, and there's obviously some more I want to talk about as well, but what I really appreciated about this movie is that this isn't a $20 million horror movie. This isn't a 15. This isn't a 10. This isn't even, as far as I'm aware, not even a $5 million movie. And once again, what's great is that it's now got the backing of Flanagan and Neon, so it is getting that theatrical release, but it feels like it belongs on the big screen, and that's a real testament to and a real positive of what Chris Stuckmann has done here, because this doesn't look like a cheap movie. Everything that's supposed to work sort of works in regards to the way the movie looks. He clearly understands the visual element of movies and aesthetically, and you would hope so, because obviously, you know, as far as I'm aware, he's a movie critic. You would hope so, and I'll get into a little bit more about that later. But he clearly understands the visual side of a movie, and that really shows in the movie. It's a very nice looking movie. I think there's a lot of really nice shots. He understands how to move a camera, but none of the shots necessarily feel out of place. Like, it's not as if he's trying to achieve a look or a shot that doesn't suit the tone of the movie, or doesn't throw you off from the scene that you're watching. It's nothing that's really out there just to go, remember, I'm a filmmaker and I can do whatever I want, and I can do upside down shots and stuff like that. It's only relevant when it needs to be relevant, and that I really commend him for, because it goes to show that from this point onwards, if he goes and then gets a bigger budget for his next movie, or even if it's the same, at least you know that the visual journey that you're going to be on is actually a very good one. Because once again, this isn't a big budget studio horror. This is essentially a crowd-funded movie where they threw a bit more money in so he could sort the rest out. So visually, he's done a fantastic job. I think the lighting in it is really good, and they do a fantastic job with that. I think that the way he's lighting the scene is a very good replication, or a very good indication of how, as the viewer, we should be feeling. And that's why lighting is so important. If you've just got a shot that's bright as anything, it's not really scary. But a lot of this movie, it's in the shadows, or the things are lurking in the shadows that you may not even have seen the first time. And it wouldn't even surprise me if that at some point down the line, you know, like he comes out and it's like, yeah, like this person is in the background when you didn't even see it on your first or second watches. And it's that type of movie, you know, it plays, the visual elements of it plays very well into what the idea, the concept of the story is. So that's a really good thing, because it means to show that what comes next, and I'm going to talk about that as well, but what comes next for him, you know, at least he understands the visual journey that you can be on. One of the things that's important about as important, if not more important, especially with horror when it comes to the visuals, is the sound. And I would say out of everything in this movie, the sound design was my favorite element of it. Now, the sound design I always put into all into one thing. So I'm talking about the score itself was very good. I really liked the score. Once again, it suited the movie, but also it feels like that sort of classic horror movie sort of score, which works really well for the movie. But the sound design itself, you know, when the gnarly shit is happening, you hear it, you feel it. I've watched quite a few movies recently where there's things that are happening and they don't have the impact that they should do, because they don't have the right sound design. And of course, this movie, luckily, it really does. So once again, it's another thing that it feels like Chris Stuckmanns understands about movies, understands about horror. The sound design is something that's so integral to making the audience feel what he wants you to feel, and when to not make you feel the things that you shouldn't, to lure you in, so to speak. And then he has that impact of sound and the visual element, and put it together. It's done really, really well. So I would really praise him on that side of it. So you've got great, you know, sound design, so on. I think the set pieces, when they happen pretty well. You know, like the way that they transition from scene to scene is done pretty well. But I will go into that a little bit more in my cons. But I think that overall, it feels like it's a good visual and sound journey that we're on with this movie that he's created very well. So it goes to show that take away everything else, and that I'll talk about when it comes to the writing side and the editing side. And the editing isn't too bad, but I'll go into that as well. I'm going to keep saying I'm going to go into it, because, you know, I've got to try. I'm trying to be as honest as I can be, and I always am. So there's going to be more that I will explore and talk about in the movie. But I suppose for me, the takeaway in regards to just talking about the cons, just talking about the pros of the movie and what I liked about the movie, is that I feel almost like it's secured that as a horror filmmaker, he understands and actually was able to show us that he can deal with a movie on a visual level, but also on a sound design level, and get the right people in the right places, as well as him doing the right things as essentially a director of a movie, as a filmmaker, irrelevant of, as I said, taking away the right inside of it. As somebody that's just shooting and making the movie, he done most of the right things in regard to the visual and audio elements. And that's a very good start for, once again, a movie created with not the budget of a studio budget. And that's one of the main key points to take away from everything that I say, and I'm sure I'll repeat a million times over. That's my pros. Let's get into the cons. So sometimes the cons can be the most difficult things to talk about, which is absolutely fine, because if you want to review a movie, if you want to be honest, then of course you're going to have to do it. But also it can be really, really important, because it gives people the opportunity to learn from it, or potentially the opportunity for people to see things a little bit differently. And I've already had conversations with people about this movie that feel differently, and I've already seen things, and that I'll talk about as well, that people see things a little bit differently. And that's what's great about horror, is that it's all subjective. We all feel the same. We all feel how we feel about whatever it is we've watched. And with this movie, it's a difficult one, because you still have to keep into your mind that this is a first time director, but you also then still have to keep into your mind that this is somebody that reviewed movies for a living, but also you have to keep into your mind that this is a guy that knows that, who obviously does that, and he knows that one of the first questions and one of the first thoughts of what people are going to say is, well, surely you review movies, so surely you should make the best movie that's ever been made, because you can't critique movies without making, a great movie. So that's a really hard part, and something that I think is really brave and bold about Chris Stuckmann. Stuckmann, is that it? I hope it's right. Chris Stuckmann. I really hope that it is one of those things that he's sort of proud of doing, because irrelevant of what I'm just about to say, he's still brave enough to take himself into the world of creating and making a movie, even though he critiqued movies. And from what I understand, doesn't really do the critiquing as much anymore. But so this is where it gets a bit tough. So Shelby Oaks has the visual elements, like I've spoken about. It has the audio elements, but there's more to a movie than just that. And that's where this movie struggles. I would personally say that the writing in this movie is a little bit here, there, and everywhere, and doesn't necessarily know where or what it's trying to be, or if it does, it doesn't successfully show that to its audience. This movie, at its core, has a pretty basic storyline in regards to, you've got a girl. She has this series, this paranormal series, with the worst name ever. I think it's Paranormal Paranoids or whatever it was, which is awful, but then also probably suits those sort of awful programs with these nerds going around hunting ghosts and getting scared of ghosts that they're trying to find, which always confuses me. What's ghosts are just humans, right? So why are you scared of other people when you're going around haunted? Anyway, that's me going on a tangent about haunted house things and paranormal shows, which I'm not going to do. That's for another time. But essentially, you've got the girl who's part of this thing, this paranormal program. She goes missing. Her sister's trying to find her. And that is essentially what the film is. But of course, there's more mystery and more, horrible things that they come across within the movie. And then it takes a turn in regards to what the rest of the movie is. So it starts out where it's trying to base itself a little bit in reality, but then becomes, more paranormal and more about, sort of a cult and so on like that. And the monster of the incubus and so on like that. But as I said, at the core, it's not very an overcomplicated story, but the movie itself sort of overcomplicates itself because it doesn't necessarily know what it's trying to be. The easiest way for me to put what I think about this movie is that it has a constant identity crisis. It doesn't know whether it wants to be a mockumentary, so to speak, where you're with the sister. It doesn't necessarily, know whether it wants to be a found footage movie. And then also it doesn't necessarily show that, know whether it wants to be an actual full horror movie. And I think that plays... I think the intentions of Chris Stuckmann are right. I think that he was trying to do something different, where he thought, well, how many movies out there show multiple different genres of subgenres within one movie, right? And it's quite a bold, idea to do that. He's like, well, we could do a found footage. We could do like the mockumentary documentary thing, but then we can also make an actual feature. But it doesn't work, and that's pretty much why people haven't really done that too much, in the past, or aren't doing that so much. Apart from another movie, it's quite similar called Strange Harvest, which I also saw and did a quick review of on our Instagram. So once again, I appreciate the boldness of trying to do something like that, but it doesn't work because, as I said, it just feels like the movie's got a bit of an identity crisis. I feel that he should have just picked his lane and stayed in it, because then you are able to focus on that lane that you're in and not the multiple different lanes that you're trying to achieve to create something that feels a little bit different and a little bit new. Now, there's nothing wrong with trying to do that, but there is something wrong when it gets in the way of the movie being what it should or could be. So I think it really does have an identity crisis. Like, I would have liked this to be a found footage movie and an entirety one, and I would have been interested in that. Or if it was just a flat out horror movie and you're on this journey, because it's very weird when you go from this sort of mockumentary thing they're doing with the older sister who's trying to find her younger sister, but then that is seen, and that only happens in the movie twice, and it feels very pointless. It should have just gone from the found footage to the movie itself of the sister trying to find her younger sister, and then that's where the events of the movie take place and it hold, and it's in that visual, and that's that medium of storytelling within horror. It just got too convoluted. It just, as I said, it had its own identity crisis, and that's one thing that I would honestly say is something to learn from. That sometimes you've got these ideas where you're like, this would be a fantastic idea, because I don't necessarily know if I've seen it in a movie before, where you've got multiple different ways of telling the story, or different formats within horror to tell the story. But it doesn't work if you haven't done something which is something that isn't necessarily great in this movie, which is right in the movie to work as a movie in its entirety. Which is one of my other big cons of the movie, is that I'm pretty sure that I could edit this movie down to probably like a 45 minute short movie that you could put out on YouTube, because there's a lot of moments in this movie where the character of the older sister, who's on the hunt for her younger sister, there's a lot of moments where you feel like they're happening over and over again, where she's, lurking around somewhere that's super creepy, and something's going to happen, but that sort of feels like it happens more times than it should do, and you're not getting the in-between story parts, or you're not having moments that deliver more of an emotional punch because of the situation that is happening. That really annoyed me, because once again, it's like, so like I've said in so many things that I've done, videos, reviews, podcasts, when it comes to making a movie, every single aspect of that movie has to have a point, and it has to have a point of being there. Otherwise, there's no point in making a movie. Or, I mean, there's a lot of movies that there's no point in making. But in regards to this, this is a movie they're putting on the big screen. It's his first feature film that he's trying to do at a feature film length. And this is literally an hour and a half, this movie. I think it's literally 90 minutes. But you could take so much of it out, even though it's only 90 minutes, because there feels so much of the same sort of thing happening, but in a different scenery. She can be looking really like, scared in the woods, but then she can be looking really scared in like a jail and stuff. Now, that's not to say that those scenes aren't good or they have a bit of a payoff, but it once again gets repetitive in a movie that's 90 minutes. And that's not necessarily a good thing. If it's, sometimes you'll get things like that in a film that's like 2 hours or more. Not necessarily great for a movie that's 90 minutes. So I might have said this at the start or whatever, but I think that he should potentially look at a different writer going forward, because I think maybe a different writer might be able to flesh out those moments that he could have in there, instead of the moments that he does that feel quite repetitive. That, I think, would have really helped the movie a long way. The other thing that I didn't necessarily like so much is that not necessarily the performances aren't all that bad in it. I don't think that they're necessarily that bad in it, but for some reason, no one really in it is almost delivering, once again, and I've already mentioned it, the emotional punch of what you could get from this movie. A big example of that is the husband. I hate, when it comes to performances and actors and stuff, I hate saying that they didn't do a great job, but at the same time, I'm being honest, and he didn't. The guy that played the husband, I don't know what it was. I don't know whether it was the edits that they had to use, and the footage that they shot, that was the best that they could do. But he just was never, he felt very, scene by scene, it just felt like he was the same in regards to on an emotional level. There never felt anything in this movie that was giving you that big emotional punch, when they're having an argument and stuff. You never necessarily feel it. And I also got that from the lead actress in this as well, who once again does a good job within the movie, but it just still felt like there was something missing in the movie, the urgency, but once again, that's not necessarily always down to the performances, because that can be down to, once again, the direction, but it can also be down to the editing. The editing is pretty good in this. I wouldn't say it's awful, but once again, editing is such a fantastic tool in regards to doing it right, to tell the story, the flow of the story, the flow of the concept, the idea, the where it goes. You have to make that organic, and you have to make it work. And it makes me wonder, is like they're sitting there and go, did they sit there and go like, have we not got anything different than the same thing as what's already happened? And if they didn't, then once again, it's another thing to learn from, right? So, yeah, I think it lacks the emotional punch that it could potentially have. I think it feels like reasonably repetitive. I think there's a lot of stuff, like there's a lot of elongated shots, once again, that makes me feel like it's about trying to get at least that 90-minute runtime. And that's not a great thing for feature films. So should this have even been a full feature film? Could it have been something that he made for his YouTube channel, or a Chris Stuckmann, movie YouTube channel sort of stuff for his movies? But also at the same time, you're going to make a lot more money if you're making a feature film that you get to now put nationwide, So it's a tricky one. But I think you could easily cut this down to be, a longer short movie, and it be more effective and deliver more of the emotional punch to what you get. But also it would help it not feel so, like it's got the identity crisis that I keep saying. It keeps on going. It keeps on feeling like it's constantly trying to be multiple different formats of horror and multiple different movies. You're from this point here, and the next thing you know, you're with some crazy old lady who might be the highlight of the movie. And the way that scene is shot is actually really fantastic. So once again, like I said, on the visual side of it, he's nailed that really for what he can do with this budget. But from that scene, that scene there, from that point onwards, it feels like a completely different movie to everything we've already seen. So it's almost like one movie that's a whole movie that's an anthology, where you've got a whole story that is the same story throughout, but yet it's shot in different ways, or the way that it's portrayed on screen is all completely different. So once again, a lot of that is to do with the writing, and really trying to flesh out what the movie is and the identity of what the movie is and what it's trying to be. And I think that's a big learning part of what I personally think Shelby Oaks is. So let's get into my overall thoughts on the movie. So I think a really interesting start to how I think about the movie is actually talking about how other people feel about the movie and how I do, and all of that combined is actually a really positive thing for Chris Stuckmanns. Now, on paper, it doesn't necessarily sound like the greatest thing, but actually for him as a filmmaker, as a director, it's a really, really good thing. So obviously I went to London, as I said, I watched the movie. I got on the train, I wrote all my notes, so it was all fresh in my head. I've looked over them sort of since. Not too much has changed, I haven't added too much. But then on the train journey home, after I did all that, I thought, you know what, like I've seen it, I've written my notes, I know how I feel about it. But now it'd be interesting to sort of see, because I don't know, I went into this movie sort of blind in regards to, I didn't know what other people really thought about it until I got on the train and thought, after I've done everything, why don't I go and see what everybody else is saying? And what everybody else is saying is it's a mixed bag of positive and negatives. And although a lot of it does lean towards the negative side of it, the advantage of that is that for two things. For one, there's actually a lot in similarities between how I feel about it and how a lot of other people who are reviewing the movie. So that is that's a really good thing, because it sort of helps him understand what might have worked and what hasn't worked. And that's a really, really, really important tool for a filmmaker to learn their craft and to understand what they need to improve on, or what they've sort of nailed and gone, oh, okay, well, at least now I can then focus on the things that I didn't do as well. The fact that a lot of people and a lot of the reviews that I saw since watching the movie are almost in agreement with quite a lot of the same things that worked and didn't work. That's a really good tool for Chris Stuckmann to go further. But also, it's the honesty side of it. A lot of the time, you do get a lot of reviews that are a little bit too scared to say what they really think about the movie. And of course, you won't get that from me. If I think something's shit, I think it's shit. And if it's great, I think it's great. And I'll tell you all about it. But I'll try and be respectful, and I'll try and be as constructive. Not everybody out there is going to do that. But with this movie, because he is part of that YouTube reviewer community, they all respect him, but they also still have their own jobs to do as reviewers. They still want to do their job right. You know, some people, you know, this is what they do for a living. I wish I was that lucky, but a lot of people get paid their YouTube channels for doing reviews and so on. So, and they get money from it. So it's easy to see why people are a little bit more leaning on things. But with this movie, there's not a lot of people that have necessarily held back. And once again, that's a good thing for Chris Stuckmann, because you've got people being as honest as they can be about how they feel about the movie. And they're telling him the things that they don't necessarily think are right about it. And that's reflective in so many people's different reviews. Like a lot of the things I've said in my review is actually very similar to what other people have said, even though these are my genuine thoughts on the movie. So that's a fantastic thing to have. But also, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that it's the willing of and the respect for what he's achieved, and the fact that he's achieved being able to have such an incredible following and such a great fan base who essentially paid for him to make this movie, to make his dreams come true, to make a movie, which is incredible. But the fact that he's managed to get Flanagan back, and Neon to be the producers and be the backing and distributing the movie, to now get the worldwide and the nationwide release that it's getting. You know, what an incredible feat for a first-time director who is just, even though he's built up a following, but is a reviewer on YouTube. And people clearly respect him enough to tell him the truth about how they feel about his movie, rather than sugarcoating it and go, what a great, amazing movie this was. He couldn't have done anything better. Because the harsh reality is that there's a lot of stuff that is wrong with this movie. There's a lot of things that don't work. There are things that do work, and that's what makes you excited for what comes next with him, because that's interesting. Because being taken on a visual journey and a sound journey, with the sound design as good as it is in the movie, at least the next thing that he's going to do is going to work with that. But it's working all the things around it that doesn't work. Like I said, the writing, or understanding how important the editing is, and making sure, that you're not over convoluting everything. You're not over complicating the format of what you're doing. If you've got a pretty basic storyline, work towards that basic storyline and work around that, and then try not complicate it, and try not overcomplicate what the movie is, and work within those means, rather than trying to work a little bit outside the box where it might, in theory, you're like, this is a really good idea where I'm doing multiple different formats of horror and putting it into one film, but also you're doing that within a movie that feels like you're struggling to make 90 minutes, and you've got some good set pieces in it that really happen. Like, obviously there's something that happens, I'm not going to say what, that at the start of the film with somebody at the door, and it involves a gun, and that sort of comes out of nowhere, and you're like, great, that's what I want. But then you get a lot of later on where you've got the same character doing a lot of the same things in a different area, in a different setting, and then you're like, well, now are you doing it because you're sort of struggling to make the 90 minutes. And that's what you don't want. You don't want to, you know, start, middle, and end of a movie is always going to be the number one integral part of it, of making a movie, and knowing when you're going from the start to the middle to the end. But it's all about your journey to get to A, B, and C. Those middle bits, those in-between bits, are the bits that make other movies suck. It's the other bit where it makes people sit there looking at their phones or switching off. Those are the important parts of a movie, as well as having, you know, a great start, a great middle, and a great end, and having these set pieces. Never forget about those bits in between. And a lot of movies do that. And I felt that this is also one of those movies, which is a shame, because you can see, you know, the prospect in what Chris Stuckmanns is as a director. And that is, once again, one of the nice takeaways from it is that even though this isn't a movie that I would put at the top of my list of 2025 horrors, and we've had so many this year, I do actually think it's a good movie, and I do actually think I will watch it again. I don't know whether it's stuff that I'm going to pick up along the way that might make me like the movie more. I don't know. But right now, I am very impressed with the braveness and boldness of Chris Stuckmanns to just create a movie, and not just to create a movie, but to go, I'm a film critic, I'm a film reviewer. So you guys are going to think I'm going to make the best movie ever. Well, I'm going to try to, but unfortunately for me, it hasn't worked out that way. But he's going to learn from it. Of course he is. Any good filmmaker will learn from their mistakes, and or learn from what the viewer has said are their main concerns. And luckily for him, he's got a lot of people putting out reviews that obviously he's never going to watch this one, but other people that he might know within the industry of making, you know, doing reviews for YouTube and stuff. He's going to have people that he respects. He might still be all saying the same thing of their pros and cons, and he can work towards making himself a better filmmaker if he ever wants to do it again, because filmmaking can really suck and it's not an easy thing. So he might never want to do it again, but I hope for him that he does, because he is showing us that he is a good filmmaker. I think there is a good filmmaker in there, but I think for me, for what he's shown with Shelby Oaks, is that he's a good filmmaker. But I think when it comes to the writing, I think that's what he either needs to work on, or potentially let somebody else take over those duties, so we can just focus on being the director, the filmmaker. And I think that now might potentially be a better route for him. But who gives a shit, because now he's just made a movie with all of his great, incredible fan base blessing him, with Flanagan, with Neon as a distributor. And Muggins here got to go all the way to London, to Leicester Square, to go and watch it. And then it gets its wide release. What an incredible achievement either way, and irrelevant of what I say, what anybody else says. What an incredible achievement. And so fair play to him, and what a fantastic opportunity it was. And I truly hope that he gets the opportunities to continue his passion for filmmaking, because I would say, you know, on merit alone he deserves it, and I think on effort alone he deserves it. But we'll see if anything comes next. We'll see what comes next from Chris Stuckmanns, and honestly, I hope that something does come next, because I did enjoy Shelby Oaks. So I would recommend it, absolutely, because we should be supporting independent horror whenever we can. But at the same time, I would recommend it because it's a good movie. And also, it is a movie that quite clearly, wears his love for other movies, or the references of other movies. You know, this movie feels very Silent Hill-esque. There's obviously some Blair Witch in there. There's a lot of people have mentioned Hereditary, but I try not to mention it because I don't like Hereditary. I hate it. The hipster horror that it is. But yeah, go and watch this movie, irrelevant of what I say and what anybody says, because it doesn't matter what we say. I've just sat here for probably way too long talking about it, but it's really important to me, to be honest. But also, it's always really important for me to try and talk about independent horror, because We need more of it. We need more of it on the big screen, but also independent horror forces directors and filmmakers and everybody involved to be creative and not be given everything that they want, so they can then go and do all these big set pieces that don't work with the movie, but also the movie's predominantly pretty much anything that Blumhouse does, and they give it whatever money it wants now for some reason, and it forces them to be less creative and makes the movies worse for it. Think back from the iconography of what horror became, where it came from, and what it's become. And you look at the independent horrors that were made for nothing with the Texas Chainsaw Massacres and the Evil Dead and the iconography of those movies. Well, they weren't big budget movies, and they were forced. It means that they were forced, and Tobe Hooper and Sam Raimi were forced to be creative. And that's what I sort of feel with independent horror can still be. But you've got to give people the opportunity to do that on a bigger level in regards to not necessarily budgets, but to be able to give them a platform such as, cinema and cinematic releases. If they could do it back then, we can still do it now. And we're getting back round to that, I think. And that's a good thing for horror. So go and watch Shelby Oaks. Don't listen to what I say. Who gives a shit? Go and watch Shelby Oaks, because I think it's good. It just has a lot of problems. But once again, being honest with the problems that it has means that Chris Stuckmanns gets to learn from it. And that's a valuable tool for an upcoming and hopefully a continuing filmmaker. So there we go. That's what I think of Shelby Oaks. Of course, as I say, they're always longer, my reviews, because I want to be as honest as I can be. You can check out my other reviews. I've got loads of horror related content and videos on this YouTube channel. Of course, you can go and check out on the podcast. The video version of the podcast is on this YouTube channel, and also you can listen to it on any audio podcast platform as well. If you want to listen or watch more very in-depth and honest and passionate conversations about horror, then you can join me on my journey through horror with Let's Talk Horror. But until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.